Section 21 of After Dark by Wilkie Collins. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dan Grzynski. After Dark by Wilkie Collins. The French Governess's Story of Sister Rose. Part 3rd. Chapter 1. Part 2. Again, Lomaque fidgeted and hesitated. Is it not a little hard on an old man to be always asking questions of him and never answering one of his inquiries in return? He said to Rose, very gaily as to manner, but rather uneasily as to look. He will not speak out till we two are alone, thought Trudaine. It is best to risk nothing and to humor him. Come, come, he said aloud, no grumbling. I admit that it is your turn to hear our story now, and I will do my best to gratify you. But before I begin, he added, turning to his sister, let me suggest, Rose, that if you have any household matters to settle upstairs— I know what you mean, she interrupted hurriedly, taking up the work which, during the last few minutes, she had allowed to drop into her lap, but I am stronger than you think. I can face the worst of our recollections composedly. Go on, Louis. Pray go on. I am quite fit to stop and hear you. You know what we suffered in the first days of our suspense after the success of your stratagem, said Trudaine, turning to Lomaque. I think it was on the evening after we had seen you for the last time at Saint-Lazare that strange, confused rumors of an impending convulsion in Paris first penetrated within our prison walls. During the next few days, the faces of our jailers were enough to show us that those rumors were true, and that the reign of terror was actually threatened with overthrow at the hands of the moderate party. We had hardly time to hope everything from this blessed change before the tremendous news of Robespierre's attempted suicide, then of his condemnation and execution, reached us. The confusion produced in the prison was beyond all description. The accused who had been tried and the accused who had not been tried got mingled together. From the day of Robespierre's arrest, no orders came to the authorities, no death lists reached the prison. The jailers, terrified by rumors that the lowest accomplices of the tyrant would be held responsible and be condemned with him, made no attempt to maintain order. Some of them, that hunchback man among the rest, deserted their duties altogether. The disorganization was so complete that when the commissioners from the new government came to Saint-Lazare, some of us were actually half starving from want of the bare necessities of life. To inquire separately into our cases was found to be impossible. Sometimes the necessary papers were lost. Sometimes what documents remained were incomprehensible to the new commissioners. They were obliged at last to make short work of it by calling us up before them in dozens. Tried or not tried, we had all been arrested by the tyrant, had all been accused of conspiracy against him, and were all ready to hail the new government as the salvation of France. In 9 cases out of 10, our best claim to be discharged was derived from these circumstances. We were trusted by Tallien and the men of the 9th Thermidor because we had been suspected by Robespierre, Couthon, and Saint-Just. Arrested informally, we were now liberated informally. When it came to my sister's turn and mine, we were not under examination 5 minutes. No such thing as a searching question was asked of us. I believe we might have even given our own names with perfect impunity. But I had previously instructed Rose that we were to assume our mother's maiden name, Maurice, as the citizen and citoyenne Maurice. Accordingly, we passed out of prison under the same name we have lived ever since in hiding here. Our past repose has depended, our future happiness will depend, on our escape from death being kept the profoundest secret among us 3. For one all-sufficient reason which you can easily guess at, the brother and sister Maurice must still know nothing of Louis Trudaine and Rose Danville, except that they were 2 among the hundreds of victims guillotined during the Reign of Terror. He spoke the last sentence with a faint smile, and with the air of a man trying, in spite of himself, to treat a grave subject lightly. His face clouded again, however, in a moment, when he looked toward his sister as he ceased. Her work had once more dropped on her lap. Her face was turned away so that he could not see it, but he knew by the trembling of her clasped hands as they rested on her knee, and by the slight swelling of the veins on her neck, which she could not hide from him, that her boasted strength of nerve had deserted her. 3 years of repose had not yet enabled her to hear her marriage name uttered, or to be present when past times of deathly suffering and terror were referred to, without betraying the shock in her face and manner. Trudaine looked saddened, but in no way surprised by what he saw. Making a sign to Lomaque to say nothing, he rose and took up his sister's hood, which lay on a window-seat near him. "Come, Rose," he said. "The sun is shining, the sweet spring air is inviting us out. Let us have a quiet stroll along the banks of the stream. Why should we keep our good friend here, cooped up in this narrow little room, when we have miles and miles of beautiful landscape to show him on the other side of the threshold? Come, it is high treason to Queen Nature to remain indoors on such a morning as this." Without waiting for her to reply, he put on her hood, drew her arm through his, and led the way out. Lomaque's face grew grave as he followed them. "I am glad I only showed the bright side of my budget of news in her presence," thought he. "She is not well at heart yet. I might have hurt her, poor thing. I might have hurt her again sadly if I had not held my tongue." They walked for a little while down the banks of the stream, talking of indifferent matters, then returned to the cottage. By that time Rose had recovered her spirits, and could listen with interest and amusement to Lomaque's dryly humorous description of his life as a clerk at Chalons-sur-Marne. They parted for a little while at the cottage door. Rose retired to the upstairs room from which she had been summoned by her brother. Trudaine and Lomaque returned to wander again along the banks of the stream. With one accord, and without a word passing between them, they left the neighborhood of the cottage hurriedly, then stopped on a sudden, and attentively looked each other in the face, looked in silence for an instant. Trudaine spoke first. "I thank you for having spared her," he began abruptly. "She's not strong enough yet to bear hearing of a new misfortune, unless I break the tidings to her first." "You suspect me of bringing bad news?" said Lomaque. "I know you do. When I saw your first look at her, after we were all seated in the cottage parlor, I knew it. Speak without fear, without caution, without one useless word of preface. After 3 years of repose, if it pleases God to afflict us again, I can bear the trial calmly, and if need be, can strengthen her to bear it calmly too. I say again, Lomaque, speak at once and speak out. I know your news is bad, for I know beforehand that it is news of Danville." "You are right. My bad news is news of him." "He has discovered the secret of our escape from the guillotine?" "No. He has not a suspicion of it. He believes, as his mother, as everyone does, that you were both executed the day after the Revolutionary Tribunal sentenced you to death. Lomaque, you speak positively of that belief of his, but you cannot be certain of it." "I can, on the most indisputable, the most startling evidence, on the authority of Danville's own act. You have asked me to speak out. I ask you again. I insist on it. Your news, Lomaque, your news, without another word of preface." "You shall have it without another word of preface. Danville is on the point of being married." As the answer was given, they both stopped by the bank of the stream, and again looked each other in the face. There was a minute of dead silence between them. During that minute, the water bubbling by happily over its bed of pebbles seemed strangely loud. The singing of birds in a little wood by the stream side, strangely near and shrill in both their ears. The light breeze, for all its midday warmth, touched their cheeks coldly, and the spring sunlight pouring on their faces felt as if it were glimmering on them through winter clouds. "Let us walk on," said Trudaine in a low voice. "I was prepared for bad news, yet not for that. Are you certain of what you have just told me?" "As certain as that stream here is flowing by our side. Hear how I made the discovery, and you will doubt no longer. Before last week I knew nothing of Danville, except that his arrest on suspicion by Robespierre's order was, as events turned out, the saving of his life. He was imprisoned, as I told you. On the evening after he had heard your names read from the death list at the prison gate, he remained in confinement at the Temple, unnoticed in the political confusion out of doors, just as you remained unnoticed at Saint-Lazare, and he profited precisely in the same manner that you profited by the timely insurrection which overthrew the reign of terror. I knew this, and I knew that he walked out of prison in the character of a persecuted victim of Robespierre's. And for better than 3 years past, I knew no more. Now listen. Last week I happened to be waiting in the shop of my employer, Citizen Clairfait, for some papers to take into the counting-house, when an old man enters with a sealed parcel which he hands to one of the shopmen, saying, 'Give that to Citizen Clairfait.' 'Any name?' says the shopman. 'The name is of no consequence,' answers the old man, 'but if you please, you can give mine. Say the parcel came from Citizen Dubois.' And then he goes out. His name, in connection with his elderly look, strikes me directly. 'Does that old fellow live at Chalons?' I ask. 'No,' says the shopman. 'He is here in attendance on a customer of ours, an old ex-aristocrat named Danville. She is on a visit in our town.' I leave you to imagine how that reply startles and amazes me. The shopman can answer none of the other questions I put to him, but the next day I'm asked to dinner by my employer, who, for his brother's sake, shows me the utmost civility. On entering the room, I find his daughter just putting away a lavender-colored silk scarf on which she has been embroidering in silver what looks to me very like a crest and coat of arms. 'I don't mind your seeing what I am about, Citizen Lomaque,' says she, 'for I know my father can trust you. That scarf is sent back to us by the purchaser, an ex-emigrant lady of the old aristocratic school, to have her family coat of arms embroidered on it.' 'Rather a dangerous commission, even in these mercifully democratic times, is it not?' says I. 'The old lady, you must know,' says she, 'is as proud as Lucifer, and having got back safely to France in these days of moderate republicanism, thinks she may now indulge with impunity in all her old-fashioned notions. She has been an excellent customer of ours, so my father thought it best to humor her, without, however, trusting her commission to any of the workroom women to execute. We are not living under the reign of terror now, certainly. Still, there is nothing like being on the safe side." "Nothing," I answer. "Pray, what is this ex-emigrant's name?" "Danville," replies the citoyenne Clairfait. "She is going to appear in that fine scarf at her son's marriage." "Marriage!" I exclaim, perfectly thunderstruck. "Yes," says she. "What is there so amazing in that? By all accounts, the son, poor man, deserves to make a lucky marriage this time. His first wife was taken away from him in the reign of terror by the guillotine." "Who is he going to marry?" I inquire, still breathless. "The daughter of General Berthelin, an ex-aristocrat by family, like the old lady, but by principle as good a republican as ever lived. A hard-drinking, loud-swearing, big-whiskered old soldier, who snaps his fingers at his ancestors and says, 'We are all descended from Adam, the first genuine sans-culotte in the world.'" In this way, the citoyenne Clairfait gossips on all dinner-time, but says nothing more of any importance. I, with my old police office habits, set to the next day, and try to make some discoveries for myself. The sum of what I find out is this. Danville's mother is staying with General Berthelin's sister and daughter at Chalons, and Danville himself is expected to arrive every day to escort them all three to Paris where the marriage contract is to be signed at the General's house. Discovering this, and seeing that prompt action is now of the most vital importance, I undertake, as I told you, my employer's commission for Paris, depart with all speed, and stop here on my way. Wait, I have not done yet. All the haste I can make is not haste enough to give me a good start of the wedding party. On my road here, the diligence by which I travel is passed by a carriage, posting along at full speed. I cannot see inside that carriage, but I look at the box seat and recognize on it the old man Dubois. He whirls by in a cloud of dust, but I am certain of him. And I say to myself what I now say again to you. No time is to be lost. No time shall be lost, answers Trudaine firmly. 3 years have passed, he continued in a lower voice, speaking to himself rather than to Lomaque. 3 years since the day when I led my sister out of the gates of the prison. 3 years since I said in my heart, I will be patient, and I will not seek to avenge myself. Our wrongs cry from earth to heaven, from man who inflicts to God who redresses. When the day of reckoning comes, let it be the day of his vengeance, not of mine. In my heart I said those words. I have been true to them. I have waited. The day has come, and the duty it demands of me shall be fulfilled. There was a moment's silence before Lomaque spoke again. Your sister? He began hesitatingly. It is there only that my purpose falters, said the other, earnestly. If it were but possible to spare her all knowledge of this last trial, and to leave the accomplishment of the terrible task to me alone. I think it possible, interposed Lomaque. Listen to what I advise. We must depart for Paris by the diligence tomorrow morning, and we must take your sister with us. Tomorrow will be time enough. People don't sign marriage contracts on the evening after a long day's journey. We must go then, and we must take your sister. Leave the care of her in Paris, and the responsibility of keeping her in ignorance of what you are doing to me. Go to this General Berthelin's house at the time when you know Danville is there. We can get that knowledge through the servants. Confront him, and without a moment's previous warning, confront him as a man risen from the dead. Confront him before every soul in the room, though the room should be full of people, and leave the rest to the self-betrayal of a panic-stricken man. Say but 3 words, and your duty will be done. You may return to your sister, and may depart with her in safety to your old retreat in Rouen, or where else you please, on the very day when you have put it out of her infamous husband's power to add another to the list of his crimes. You forget the suddenness of the journey to Paris, said Trudaine. How are we to account for it without risk of awakening my sister's suspicions? Trust that to me, answered Lomaque. Let us return to the cottage at once. No, not you, he added suddenly, as they turned to retrace their steps. There is that in your face which would betray us. Leave me to go back alone. I will say that you have gone to give some orders at the inn. Let us separate immediately. You will recover your self-possession. You will get to look yourself again sooner if you are left alone. I know enough of you to know that. We will not waste another minute in explanations. Even minutes are precious to us on such a day as this. By the time you are fit to meet your sister again, I shall have had time to say all I wish to her, and shall be waiting at the cottage to tell you the result. He looked at Trudaine, and his eyes seemed to brighten again with something of the old energy and sudden decision of the days when he was a man in office under the Reign of Terror. Leave it to me, he said, and waving his hand, turned away quickly in the direction of the cottage. Nearly an hour passed before Trudaine ventured to follow him. When he at length entered the path which led to the garden gate, he saw his sister waiting at the cottage door. Her face looked unusually animated, and she ran forward a step or two to meet him. "Oh, Louis," she said, "I have a confession to make, and I must beg you to hear it patiently to the end. You must know that our good Lomaque, though he came in tired from his walk, occupied himself the first thing, at my request, in writing the letter which is to secure to us our dear old home by the banks of the Seine. When he had done, he looked at me and said, "I should like to be present at your happy return to the house where I first saw you." "Oh, come with us," I said directly. "I am not an independent man," he answered. "I have a margin of time allowed me at Paris, certainly, but it is not long. If I were only my own master—" And then he stopped. Louis, I remembered all we owed to him. I remembered that there was no sacrifice we ought not to be too glad to make for his sake. I felt the kindness of the wish he had expressed, and perhaps I was a little influenced by my own impatience to see once more my flower garden and the rooms where we used to be so happy. So I said to him, "I am sure Louis will agree with me that our time is yours, and that we shall be only too glad to advance our departure so as to make your traveling leisure enough for you to come with us to Rouen. We should be worse than ungrateful." He stopped me. "You have always been good to me," he said. "I must not impose on your kindness now." No. You have formalities to settle before you can leave this place." "Not one," I said, "for we have not, as you know, Louis. Why, here is your furniture to begin with," he said. "A few chairs and tables hired from the inn," I answered. "We have only to give the landlady our key, to leave a letter for the owner of the cottage, and then," he laughed, "why, to hear you talk, one would think you were as ready to travel as I am." "So we are," I said, "quite as ready, living in the way we do here." He shook his head. "But you will not shake yours, Louis, I am sure, now you have heard all my long story. You can't blame me, can you?" Before Trudaine could answer, Lomaque looked out of the cottage window. "I have just been telling my brother everything," said Rose, turning round toward him. "And what does he say?" asked Lomaque. "He says what I say," replied Rose, answering for her brother, "that our time is your time, the time of our best and dearest friend." "Shall it be done, then?" asked Lomaque, with a meaning look at Trudaine. Rose glanced anxiously at her brother. His face was much graver than she had expected to see it, but his answer relieved her from all suspense. "You are quite right, love, to speak as you did," he said gently. Then, turning to Lomaque, he added in a firmer voice, "It shall be done." End of section 21.